When I was a young lad coming up in my guitar journey, I was obsessed with the shred guitar virtuosos of the late 70s and the 80s. But two guitar players in particular that I was fixated on were Steve Vai and Eric Johnson. And for years, I was obsessed with their incredible techniques and their breakneck speed at playing guitar. But I completely ignored a very, very important aspect of their playing that is actually more relevant to me today as a guitar player. I remember when I first watched the G3 concert with Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, and Eric Johnson. And as I was frantically observing their virtuosity, I spent so much time focusing on how fast they play or what crazy techniques are they doing. Looking back now, I can say that when they played slowly, that's really where the magic was. I'm going to share with you a handful of the techniques that I observed when they'd play slowly, and we're going to go over them together. The first thing I noticed was dynamic pick attack, which I feel like you really notice more when you're playing slowly. I would even argue that it counts more when you're playing slowly. Because if you're just doing single notes, like, something like that, and you're just trying to control your pick attack, you're in control of a lot of things. Your volume and your tone. Of course, it would depend on what's being called for during the song, but whenever they would control their pick attack, they do something like... So it's like just playing a handful of notes like that, but it just kind of takes you on this journey, where you're not playing everything at the same volume, the same dynamic, right? There's a little bit of like... where you're just gently tickling the string with your pick, Because even with a lot of gain, like I'm working with right now, when I play hard, you can really hear it, but when I slow down or when I pick softly, it cleans up and it's got this almost like vocal quality to it. I got Steve Vai on the brain, so I got to be throwing in those things. So, but you see what I'm saying, right? Like just these little changes, and it's all in the picking hand, right? So all I did was control my volume and control the dynamics. And I mean, like I said, you can make a handful of notes sound a lot more interesting just by applying that. Another thing I noticed they would do is if they really wanted to pick softly, they would use their fingers. So I remember seeing, I think this was the Live in Astoria DVD that Steve Vai played. That was from 2003, I want to say. I remember vividly when he was playing, I think the song was Whispering a Prayer, which is a very, very emotional song. And there's parts where I remember he was picking with his thumb. And, I don't know what key the song is. I've never learned it. But, he was doing something like... it's something like that. It sounds like the melody to me. But it's like when he was picking with his thumb like that, like... it sounds a lot different than... even if I'm picking softly, there's like a little bit of this really warm, it's like kind of spanky, right? Because I'm just like... because what I'm doing is I'm like grabbing it with the thumb briefly, just with the flesh of the thumb, and then just plucking the string like that. And there's a whole new sound from that, right? It's like you don't have to change the actual notes you're playing, but it's in how you're playing them, And when I saw that, I was like, wow, like that was the right move, because I feel like it would have changed completely, it wouldn't have had the same kind of emotional impact if it was picked, right? So there's certain moments where things are really broken down, and you want to get a little extra emotional, get extra feely with it, right? You can just totally pick with your fingers. Now, the thumb works perfectly for little single notes like that, The very last note that I just played leads me to the next thing that I had, was late to the game on noticing that these guitar greats, were just really in control of, was their vibrato. Because, at the time, I didn't think about vibrato. I was just worried about how fast can I play, right? Like, I just want to play fast. How's your tapping? How's your sweep picking? That's all I cared about, right? Which, looking back, it's kind of funny, but I was really missing out, Like I said, it took a while for me to finally come around to these much more important techniques that actually apply to my life as a working musician a whole lot more. But with the vibrato, I noticed is that they have different styles and different speeds, So you have your slow vibrato, which I know is hard for a lot of guitar players. And here's a tip. What you want to do if you want to build that slow, controlled vibrato, you have to kind of exaggerate it, right? Which might feel a little silly. So I invite you to do this next time you're vibratoing, right? Let's say you have one speed, which is just nervous, hoping for the best kind of vibrato, right? Is while you're doing it, just pretend like you're gradually going in slow motion. And I'm saying really exaggerate it to where you're like, whoa, like whatever you got to do to just like get your whole body to slow down, and you focus on that one thing you're doing there, which is that very slow vibrato. And you want to be able to go right into that if you need to, So slow vibrato, I feel like is actually more challenging than fast vibrato, right? But of course, you got slow and you got fast, but you also got medium. So you want to find that nice middle ground where you can really hear the pitch bending, And I'm doing the kind of B.B. King style, vibrato with the first finger and then fanning these fingers out, which, he was great at. It works especially great for the fast and medium stuff. For the fast stuff, it's like this sort of almost like half circle motion I'm doing rather than just up and down, which is a whole other type of vibrato, like the Clapton style vibrato, which I've seen Eric Johnson do that a lot, which kind of has its own thing too. It's very subtle, the differences, but with the Clapton vibrato, it's like you kind of like release your whole hand and then your first finger just kind of grabbing on the string, just sort of bouncing the string directly up and down. Whereas with the B.B. King style, you're doing this sort of radial motion, right? Sounds the same, but there are times where certain, approaches to that vibrato just feels more appropriate. But again, this is something that I've seen those great guitar players, those virtuosos do. And whether they're playing fast, slow, or medium, that's how they do it. And another thing too, I've noticed, especially with Steve Vai, I've seen Steve Vai do this a lot, where it's like slow classical vibrato, right? Which is something that when you're playing a nylon string guitar, if you've never played a nylon string guitar before, if you try to vibrato up and down with like rock vibrato, right? It doesn't really register with the nylon string. So if you want a vibrato, you got to do this sort of side to side where you're fretting the note and you're not shifting your finger, but you're just kind of, you can sort of hear it, right? Very subtle. There's like this very slight sort of bending of the pitch happening. And I'd see Steve Vai do that too if he really wants to get to that slow vibrato effect, Again, it's like, even though it's so subtle and it may be a negligible thing, it's like, you got to understand that in order to play like that, it requires a lot of control, So it's just one of those things where it's just a hallmark of just absolute control over the instrument, which I guess is part of being a virtuoso. Oh, hey, real quick, if you're getting value out of this video, do me a favor, hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. It's a big help to us and it'll put you first in line for all the new lessons we got coming your way. So thanks in advance, and let's get back to business. Another technique that really flew under the radar for me for a while were slides, which is a simple idea, right? Simple technique. But there's something about slides that they just have this certain sound that is totally different than, let's say, hammering on and pulling off, right? That's got its own sound, same notes, right? But it's got a whole different sound. So if you want to even play through a scale, let's say like pentatonic scale, you just work through the scale, like, take your time with it, but and you get this very musical sound, it emulates almost like a totally different instrument, But there's also those really exaggerated slides. Steve Vai did this a lot too, where he would just go like, it's just like these kind of whiny sounding slides where he's starting from like a really high point on the fretboard, even a low point. you know, and it does something, there's something to be said about that. If you were to take that out of the equation, it wouldn't have nearly the same effect. So for those big slides, those are particularly challenging because if you don't already do those, you may be thinking, okay, well, what fret do I start on, right? But you don't even have to worry about a particular fret. You just kind of start in like a region of the fretboard. So let's say I wanted to slide up here to the 11th fret of the A string, like that, right? I'm starting, this region, which would be between maybe the 2nd and the 4th fret, but what I'm doing is I'm like revving up my hand to like, touch the string and then fret it and then slide up. And then I got to pick it at the same time, right? Of course. So I'm starting just kind of somewhere in this area. It doesn't matter which fret, whether it's the 2nd fret, 3rd, or 4th. I'm just like starting there, and then it's where you land that matters most. So you got to like visualize where it is you're trying to go and make sure that that's where you land. It's more important on where you finish than where you start with these kind of things. And if it's on the other hand, like starting from upper on the fretboard, let's say we're trying to go here, which is same note, right? On the 19th fret, sorry, the 9th fret of the B string, and we wanted to slide from, let's say, around the 19th fret, we could go like. So again, you're starting from a general area, and you're as long as you're synced up with your picking, picking that note and then making your way down and then targeting your destination, right? That's where you want to visualize and make sure you know where you're going. Then over time, you can just kind of do it to all the notes in the scale, So it's just one of those things that you can add a nice amount of spice, and it's really not that advanced of a technique. But like I said, if you took it out of the equation, those same notes wouldn't nearly have the same impact. And the final technique that I was so late in the game on recognizing from these virtuosos is bends. Just as important as vibrato, slides, dynamic picking, all that stuff. Bends are super important, but it's not just bending, right, in like kind of one capacity, because at the time, I'll tell you, when I was in my 20s and I was really into those guitar players, I would really bend one type of way, which was just, I really wanted to do that singing, like vibrato, just like that really impactful kind of bend where I would bend in vibrato, right? That's all I did, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I remember seeing Eric Johnson bending a note and just holding it with no vibrato. He was going, and he was really letting it sustain, and he took his time before he went into the vibrato, because you're almost like at the edge of your seat waiting for the vibrato to happen, and then it doesn't. And you're like, come on, come on, come on. And then finally at the end, it's like, which is another hallmark of just someone who is in full control, right? Because they got you just waiting for that thing to happen, So now here's the thing. It may seem simpler to bend a string with no vibrato, and in some ways it is, but the reason why it's so impactful is because if you think about a vocalist, right? And a vocalist reaches a high note, which is kind of like what bending is. When you bend into a high note, it's just like a climactic moment for a vocalist, right? A lot of times that's how they approach it is you hear the note and then the vibrato happens instead of like immediately vibrato, which it kind of shows that when you can hold a note without wobbling the pitch, that actually shows that you have a good sense of intonation. You're landing on the right note and you're maintaining it. Because when you add vibrato, you kind of make it a little forgiving on yourself to where you're like warbling or bending the pitch to where it almost doesn't matter if your intonation is perfect. But if you're just holding the note with no vibrato, it doesn't lie, right? It'll tell you whether you're flat or sharp. If you're going, right? Like you can hear the difference. So just those slight changes when it goes slightly flat or slightly sharp, it's pretty obvious. But if you're vibrato, then you can kind of hide behind it. Does that make sense? So that's another thing I invite you to do is when you're practicing your bends, whether it's a whole step bend, a half step bend, doesn't matter. Try to abstain from using vibrato and just kind of see where your intonation's at. And it's actually good ear training because if let's say you find out, I'm actually a little flat when I bend the notes, right? But your ear hearing that, you'll correct and you'll start to adjust your technique so that you're actually playing at the correct pitch, the correct intonation, right? Which is automatically going to make you a much more musical player because you'll be playing notes in tune. And since we're involving vibrato as well, right, the same rules apply with just regular vibrato, which is having the different speeds of it, right? So if you want to go, which is even more unforgiving when you're doing the slow vibrato, right, then medium, and then fast. You know, when you go for that fast, manic kind of energy, like I said, you can hide behind a lot of stuff. But again, there's always a time and place for that, depending on the moment in the song that calls for it. But if you're really trying to make an impact, sometimes that woo, sometimes that slow vibrato, especially after you hold a note for a while, after you bent up to it, it just does something, man. The funny thing is I spent so much time being fixated on all these advanced techniques that these virtuosos were employing when they play guitar that I had missed what arguably became the more important techniques that would apply to my life later on as a guitar player. And it also really helped me kind of mature as a player where I wasn't just compartmentalizing these guys as just like the shred guys. I know a lot of people that would do that, and it's just kind of like, man, like there's so much more than that, Even got to the point where calling someone a shredder almost doesn't feel like a compliment anymore because especially like, I would never call Eric Johnson or Steve Vai, for example, shredders. I mean, there's so much more than that. They have all these other incredible techniques. They're very dynamic, right? Their vibrato's great. Their bends great. Their slides are great. All those very important guitar linguistic techniques that allow for maximum expression when you're playing. I mean, they had those just as well as they had all the fast advanced stuff. So if it just so happens that you've shied away from listening to guitar players like that because you think it's just going to be all flash and no substance, I'm telling you, there's plenty of substance. So those are the very, very important techniques that I wish I'd focused on in my youth when I was studying these virtuosos. And if you're itching to start using these techniques, especially with your soloing, well, I got just the thing for you that's going to be the perfect playground for these techniques, and it's going to vastly improve your abilities as a soloist. And I got it for you right here. This is a guide on how to instantly solo in any key. You're going to learn in record time how to find every single key on your fretboard and learn how to solo in both major and minor in each of those keys. And if you add in all those techniques we covered today into the mix, man, you're going to sound pro. And this lesson is 100% yours, 100% free. Just be sure to click here to claim your copy or check the link I left in the description box. Good guitar playing is just good guitar playing. It doesn't matter if it's fast or slow or anything in between. But for me, the hallmark of a true virtuoso is someone who can do all of those things, because why not?